Good evening, everyone. Uh, Hi, my name is Paul B. Preciado. I'm the curator of public programs of Documenta 14, and it's my great pleasure again to welcome you to the Parliament of Bodies. Well, I see now faces that I know from last week. So you know that we started this opening of the Parliament of Bodies with a series of exercises of freedom. And I'm saying this also for the new people that are coming today for the first time, that we started working with this idea by Foucault that freedom, because this is like a Parco Eleftherias, right? So freedom park. The freedom is neither natural, that is not something that we're being born with, that is not a property that we have, but that is a practice. It's something that we have to exercise. And all this past week and this week, we've been trying to exercise freedom with many different participants in different ways, challenging the conventional distinction between theory and practice, between talk and performance, between art and activism. And we're also thinking about writing as a practice of freedom, as a way of exercising freedom, as one of the main technologies of subjectivity, as a technology of resistance. And along many discussions with Queen that is here today with me, we were thinking about the magazine South as already part of the same project, and even the Parliament of Bodies and the public program as a sort of a 3D magazine open to the landscape of the city. And therefore it's a great pleasure for me to have today some of the participants and the people that have been contributing to the magazine to exercise freedom with us today. And I pass the mic to Queen. Oh, no, to Adam. Excuse me. I pass the mic to Adam. That is behind me. Excuse me, Adam.
Thank you, Paul, and welcome everybody to this evening with the magazine and its many authors. It's the second issue already, and first I owe a big thanks to those who supported the magazine, and especially the Goethe Institute, as well as Kulturstiftung des Bundes, the German Federal Cultural Foundation, and I would like to welcome Alexander Fahrenholz, who is here from the German Federal Cultural Foundation. And also my thanks go to the municipality of Athens for making this great space available to us for a time being. We try to make it as good as it could be, or maybe we challenged it a little bit, hopefully. It serves its purpose so far. Now to the magazine. The second issue of South as a State of Mind, as the magazine of Documenta 14 went to print almost exactly 1 year before the inauguration of the exhibition in Athens, and 14 months before the scheduled opening of its second and conclusive iteration in Kassel. So this is important for us because we started here in Athens with a number of activities that have been so far very intense, but very seldom got to public visibility. But the 2 volumes of the magazine published so far are these visible signs of our work here, and work also that has involved and will involve a lot of people and both institutional and non-institutional entities here in Athens. So it's just our way of also communicating, talking to people, and making Documenta 14 here in Athens hopefully in a while a part of the environment, not really camouflaged but sort of coexisting. As you know, in line with the concept that I originally proposed in 2013, Documenta 14 is being conceived as one exhibition that will comprise 163 days through a trajectory of two distinctive and partially overlapping timelines from April till September 2017. As such, Documenta 14 will encompass two locations which in our view are emblematic of the extreme and polarized states of Europe and perhaps the world at large today. Since early 2015, when we began the process of shaping the Documenta 14 South and alongside it the curatorial work on the exhibition, the course of political events forming our future has seemed at times nebulous. Simultaneously, however, these events have become strangely predictable as well, and no longer as abstract and distant as they once appeared to us. The continuing military and political involvement of the Western powers and Russia in Syria has produced a bloody and all too conceivable stalemate, a favorite figure of warmongering international politics. In parallel, the wars and conflicts in Iraq, Afghanistan, and sub-Saharan Africa continue. These wars, often the result of Western policies since the colonial era or recent military intervention, have produced millions of refugees fleeing their untenable violence, people compelled to risk their lives and the lives of their children crossing the Mediterranean and Aegean seas to end up in Greece with no chance of finding refuge. Instead, they end up trapped in a crisis-plagued state where they currently face the threat of immediate relocation to Turkey, a consequence of the one-in, one-out swap deal between Germany and Turkey that brings, albeit in strangely distorted form, the memory of the Lausanne Treaty and its forced population exchange between Greece and Turkey in 1923. In the meantime, the economic and social conditions in Greece have been deteriorating still further, as the nominally left-wing Greek government has implemented a string of austerity measures with the tacit compliance of the neoliberal opposition, mandated by the EU and its attendant international financial institutions. Fully oblivious to any idea of social and economic recovery, such measures and the politics they produce have engendered indifference, frustration, despair, and at best rage. Are we exaggerating? In Germany, the rise of right-wing populism in the guise of the AfD party or Action for Germany and extremism organized around the fear of the other, conflating local Muslims and new refugees with terrorists, is as apparent as never before in the country's post-war history. Similar nationalistic, xenophobic forces in democratic disguise have been coming to the fore across Western Europe. See Austria, Denmark, France, Switzerland, and in the countries of the former Eastern Bloc. Consider Hungary's strongman Orban and Poland's Kaczynski. While Putin's regime in Russia, following the annexation of Crimea and war in eastern Ukraine, begets specters of a new Cold War. The politics of the until recently marginal European parties that profit from all forms of populist resentment parallel the lack of new political initiatives from the former main parties that could be founded on ideas of solidarity and the commons. All of these very troubling developments have taken place over the past 2 years, corresponding with the time in which Documenta 14 has been in the making. As a team working on the project in Athens and Kassel, we feel precisely the pressure under which we operate. As we recently began to welcome in Athens the first participants involved to join the endeavor of Documenta 14, artists and other participants from all parts of the globe, we also understood that as long as at least a limited freedom of movement is granted to individuals, while being fully aware that few enjoy this privilege, there is the possibility of working together towards scenarios that offer strategies against the dominant modes and modalities of passivity, control, terror, and the deterioration of social bonds that is taking place in all areas of life. Nevertheless, while the nation-states organized around the flows of capital keep self-adjusting their strategies to benefit the 1%, What was once a looming shape of things to come is now a bitter reality knocking at the door, if one has a door. People are living with the danger of death all the time, so they want to tell their story. Sharif Kiwan, the spokesperson of the Syrian filmmakers collective Abu Nadara, noted in a recent interview. Late last year, we decided to make the platform of the Documenta 14 website available to the anonymous collective for its regular Friday releases of new films, which they call emergency cinema, as they call it pretty accurately. Films are made in Syria by its self-taught and volunteer filmmakers. We believe that the struggle for the right to dignified image that the collective has been carrying out since its inception in 2011 in the wake of the popular revolution in Syria should be supported. While it is not clear what contemporary art can do in order to change the increasingly indefensible and clearly unsustainable state of things, we hope to be able to provide some possible answers through the works produced for Documenta 14 or presented within its framework. The very first responses from the artists who visited Athens in early 2016 were clearly driven by a sense of the political, social and ecological urgency of this historical moment. Likewise, we hope that the second issue of the Documenta 14 testifies to this need of addressing the real, without, however, falling into the pitfalls of direct representation, which remains a politically dubious term if we consider the cul-de-sac of contemporary democracy, ceding what needs to be done to political representation itself. Words and images can be put in service of critical inquiry, and silence and masks, while withdrawing the claim on self-evident truth, can help give sharp contours to political statement. Through poetic elision or dramatic mise-en-scène in a public performance of storytelling or by retelling a personal story in private, an epic dimension can be restored amidst contingencies of shattered everyday life. A series of recent artist visits that took place in Documenta 14 workspaces in Athens and Kassel art schools, including semi-public encounters with students and faculty, as well as this magazine, are two stages of this process of situating the artwork, both discursively and physically, in a space we would like to designate as both poetic and social, and that is political at the same time. The discussion of social and political meaning that artifacts, rituals, and poetic acts may have for communities weaves a red thread through this issue of South, indicating possibilities for contemporary works of art that go beyond the aesthetic, mercantile, or merely intra-artistic critical function. In both the magazine and the exhibition of Documenta 14, as well as in the public program here at Parco Eleftheria with Parliament of Bodies and Exercises of Freedom, more specifically, we will continue working toward bringing these meanings into public and critical consideration. Thank you. And I give the floor to Quinn.
So like Paul and Adam, I just want to thank you all so much for being here tonight. And we're very happy to be launching the second issue of the Documenta South in the public programs and in the Parliament of Bodies, because as Paul said, it feels like the public programs and the publications are intertwined to a degree that is difficult to describe. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of South as a State of Mind, which I think some of you here know about. South as a State of Mind is a magazine that was founded by Marina Fokitis in Athens in 2012. And last year, in 2015, Marina graciously allowed us to, for lack of a better term, borrow the magazine for 2 years and to temporarily transform it into what you see now, which is the Documenta 14 journal. Our idea for the magazine was to present the thinking about politics, art, bodies, and subjectivities that was streaming through the D14 project in all the disparate and dissident forms that a magazine specifically allows, in critical essays, in fiction and allegory and poetry, in art history and photo essays and artist projects. 2, we were and continue to be interested in reading power through resistance, per Foucault, which feels particularly pointed when done in the space of a publication, of language itself. A magazine is a kind of anthology. It's a strange collective vessel that allows one to bring multiple voices and perspectives and parts of the world together into its language and lexicon and criticality, creating a kind of assembly, but not quite a chorus. But to give some cohesion and coherency to our collections of so many different voices, of our magazines, we decided to choose a working theme or red thread for each issue. The theme of the first issue, which we launched with so many of you last year around this time at the National Library of Greece, was forms and figures of displacement and dispossession, and the modes of resistance, be they aesthetic, political, literary, biological, or other, found within them. The working theme of the issue we are launching tonight is, as Adam suggested just now, the much more enigmatic idea of silence and masks. We were drawn to the fact and metaphor of silence and masks because we noticed how often they become the means by which one can resist or circumnavigate regimes of representation. Both silence and mass are also, perhaps paradoxically, the means by which we act and speak. Our language is built by the silence that interrupts it. Our self-representation is often built on its very occlusion. Thus, silence and mass are modes of aesthetic and political participation, as much as they are resistance to it. The contributors to this issue, some of which are here tonight and you will hear later on, explore issues of masking identity and silencing dissent, orality and recognition, indigeny and exile, provenance and repatriation, and colonial and gendered violence. In our writing and editing as well, we put on our own masks, understanding them as historical and contemporary means of subversion that are often employed to defy the ways in which our bodies are unequally accorded basic rights in the global economy of citizenship, geography, race, and gender. In parallel, we surveyed silence, which is of course one of the many masks of language, as a response to the empty authority and authoritarianism of so much communication, a long linguistic flood of nationalistic propaganda, neoliberal preaching, and coded violence. Indeed, we know, as many of you know, silence as a necessary aspect of language, as a way to propose a kind of radical reception. For to be silent suggests not only resistance, but recipience and recognition. As Stathis Gourgouris, one of our authors in this issue, who will be speaking tonight, observes, one listens to the universe before anything else. That said, I should probably stop speaking and start listening. But before I do, I would just like to thank a couple of my colleagues that are here tonight, without whom this magazine would not exist. My co-editor, Adam, my editor, Laura Preston, and I would like to thank everybody at Public Programs and Paul for making this possible. It's really wonderful. And that's it. So I think we're going to begin the exercises of freedom now.
I'm Stathis Gourgouris. This is exercise number 20. What we just heard was the sound of two black holes colliding in space some 1.5 billion light years ago. Μόλις ακούσαμε τον ήχο από δύο μαύρες τρύπες να συγκρούονται στο διάστημα πριν από 1,5 δισεκατομμύρια χρόνια. This was a piece I wrote about in the journal, and which was in many ways commissioned by Quinn, for which I am forever grateful. And I thought I'd begin with just a couple of samples of some of the writing before we go on to discuss further the problem of listening. Space chord. Ο μεγάλος Sandra. This is a space chord, which is a device by the great Sun Ra and his orchestra. It's a cluster of notes played by the entire orchestra, meant to create a chord that calls people to attention, to listening, not just the audience, but the musicians. For some time now, I've been thinking about the fact that the problem of listening is very much entwined with the problem of democratic being. We think of the freedom of speech as the one of the fundamental notions in democracy. But without the freedom of listening, the freedom of speech, you can understand, can become a useless narcissistic exercise of hearing your own voice. So I will continue by presenting 3 different pieces or documents that are not in the journal in this context. They're selected specifically for what we're doing as a whole, exercises in freedom, from the standpoint of listening and problematizing the relation of bodies. The first one is called Starry Night. Sometimes one can apprehend history through the coordination, intersection, or coexistence, the symphony of anonymous sounds. We suppose that all sounds begin and end in some name, but we rarely really know it. In all cases, however, the time, place, and name of sound bear a relentless precision. On the night of July 15, 2006, Mazen Kerbaj came out on the terrace of his home in Beirut to play his trumpet. He had no audience, no public. He did have, however, a fellow player. On the hill across the way, he could even see this player. He could see and feel the catastrophic reverberations of Israeli bombers. Kerbaj came out on his terrace to play a duet with the bombs. He felt that the Israeli planes bombarding his city for several nights already could no longer keep him locked up indoors. He came out on his terrace to greet them, to confront them on his own battlefield, sound to sound. Not sound against sound. Here's the key difference. Kerbaj came out on his terrace one sweet summer night in Beirut to confront those who were ruining it. Not going against them, but playing with them, accompanying their sound and thereby altering their exclusive mark. This is a real documentum. The second piece that I will perform is a text by one of the great playwrights of the second half of the 20th century, along with Samuel Beckett and Bertolt Brecht, probably the greatest. His name is Hanne Müller. He is a very important figure in the history of documenta, both as a performer and in terms of his interventions. The piece is called The Liberation of Prometheus. It was written, I think, in 1972. And of course, it addresses, as you will see, directly the very notion of exercise of freedom and the difficulty of an exercise of freedom. It will be interrupted by various sound collage pieces that I've put together from very small sound segments, from 3 seconds to about 10 seconds, which I've put together in a collage form that are taken from the music of another great living German composer, Heine Goebbels, who has done a music drama based on this piece. Prometheus brought lightning to the humans, but did not teach them to use it against the gods, perhaps because he took his meals at the table of the gods, which would have been less sumptuous if shared with humans. Either because of his deed or conversely because of his omission to go further with his deed, the gods commanded Hephaestus the blacksmith to chain Prometheus to the Caucasus, where a dog-headed eagle devoured daily his perpetually regenerating liver. The eagle, who considered him to be a partially edible rock formation capable of small movements, and especially when eaten, of discordant song, also took to emptying his bowels all over him. This excrement became his nourishment. Turning it then into his own excrement, Prometheus passed it down to the rock below, so that when Hercules, his liberator, climbed the desolate mountain after 3,000 years, he could already distinguish the chained prisoner from a great distance, sparkling wide with bird shit. Repulsed again and again by the wall of stink, the liberator had to circle around the massif for another 3,000 years, while the dog-headed continued to eat the liver of the chained and continued to nourish him with his excrement, so that the stink increased at the same rate as the circling until the liberator became accustomed. At last, helped by rain that lasted 500 years, Hercules was able to draw within shooting range. Immediately he pinched his nose with one hand. 3 times he missed the eagle because involuntarily he closed his eyes, dazed by the waves of stink which struck him when he took his hand off his nose to bend the bow. The 3rd arrow slightly wounded the prisoner on his left foot. The 4th killed the eagle. It is said that Prometheus wept not for his wound, but for the eagle, his only companion for 3,000 years and provider for 3,000 years twice over. You think I am supposed to eat your arrows? He screamed, forgetting he had ever known other nourishment. You dirty peasant! Can you fly with this feet of shit? And with this, he vomited from the smell which Hercules carried all around him, since he had cleaned the Augean stables, because the horse shit stank to high heaven. Eat the eagle, said Hercules. Prometheus could not grasp the meaning of those words, eat the eagle. He also knew better. The eagle had been his last connection with the gods. The daily pecking, his only way of remembering them. Never more restless in his chains, he cursed the liberator as a murderer, and he tried to spit in his face. Meanwhile, Hercules, doubled over with disgust, tried to find the shackles that bound the enraged man to the rock. Time, weather, and shit had made flesh indistinguishable from metal and both indistinguishable from stone. But now, loosened by the violent rage of the prisoner, they did become discernible. It turned out that no chains existed. They were already eaten by rust. Only at the point of his cock were the shackles intertwined with the flesh, because Prometheus, at least during the first 2,000 years, occasionally masturbated. Later, he must have forgotten even his cock. The liberation left a scar behind. Even if disarmed and exhausted from the millennia, Prometheus could have easily freed himself had he not feared the eagle. Yet, his behavior during his liberation showed that he feared freedom more than the bird. Roaring and foaming at the mouth, with teeth and claw, he defended his chains against the liberator's grip. Once freed, on his hands and knees, he howled from the misery of trying to crawl with his numb limbs. And he cried out, longing for his peaceful place on the rock, under the wings of the eagle, where nothing ever changed or moved other than the occasional earthquake decreed by the gods. Even after he could finally walk upright, he struggled against the descent like an actor who does not want to leave the stage. Hercules had to haul him off on his shoulders. The descent to humanity lasted another 3,000 years. The gods tore the mountains to bits so that descending through the frenzy of broken stone was more like falling. Hercules bore his precious burden with such care so it did not come to harm, like a child clinging to his breast. Clasping the liberator's neck, Prometheus whispered warnings of the direction of the debris so they could be evaded. Meanwhile, he continued to scream aloud to the heavens, which had darkened by the whirling rocks, declaring his innocence in this liberation affair. There followed the suicide of the gods. One after another, they hurled themselves down from the heavens onto Hercules' back and disintegrated into rubble. Then Prometheus worked his way back onto the shoulders of the liberator and struck the pose of the victor who rides on a sweating horse to meet the cheers of the people. Το τελευταίο κομμάτι που θα παρουσιάσω είναι ένα κολλάζ ηχητικό που βασίζεται πάνω σε αυτό το στίχο. Οι κοινωνικοί αγώνες δεν ανακοινώνονται. This piece is difficult to translate in English. The Greek literally means social struggles are not announced or not to be announced. In order to be able to get the pun, we could translate it as public struggles should not be publicized.
Οι κοινωνικοί αγώνες δεν ανακοινώνονται. Οι κοινωνικοί αγώνες δεν ανακοινώνονται. Οι κοινωνικοί αγώνες δεν ανακοινώνονται. Οι κοινωνικοί αγώνες δεν ανακοινώνονται.
Οι κοινωνικοί αγώνες δεν ανακοινώνονται. Οι κοινωνικοί αγώνες δεν ανακοινώνονται. Οι κοινωνικοί αγώνες δεν ανακοινώνονται. Οι κοινωνικοί αγώνες, οι κοινωνικοί αγώνες δεν ανακοινώνονται. Οι κοινωνικοί αγώνες δεν ανακοινώνονται. Δεν ανακοινώνονται. Κοινωνικοί αγώνες δεν ανακοινώνονται. Κοινωνικοί αγώνες δεν ανακοινώνονται. Κοινωνικοί αγώνες δεν ανακοινώνονται. Οι κοινωνικοί αγώνες δεν ανακοινώνονται. Δεν ανακοινώνονται. Thank you.